is Steve Zelzer with Workweek, and we've covered the struggle and conditions of transit workers around the country and also the fight for democracy in transit unions. And the issue of democratic unions is critical if workers are going to be able to defend themselves. And joining us today is John Ferretti. He's a member of TWU 100 and has a caucus in the union. And there's been a struggle recently in his local 100, which is the largest transit workers union local in the country, around the issue of an action by an officer of leadership who attacked a member, and there was an altercation. And what has happened about that has raised the issue of democracy and accountability of the union. So welcome to our show, John.
Thank you, Steve. It's always a pleasure to join you and have the kind of connections nationwide in terms of labor struggle. It's important for us all to learn from each other's.
Why don't you talk about this incident and then
Sure.
what it's about and what it means for the labor movement in New York and nationally?
Yeah. Well, I think that this incident kind of happens in the backdrop of a union that has been in mass retreat for a long time against an ongoing attack on new hires, 5-year wage progressions, poverty pensions, et cetera. So you have a union that during COVID, for example, did really nothing to enforce any kind of mass safety demands of the members, enforce PPE, these kind of things. And then in the last elections, Canella Gomez was elected as an opposition candidate, running against all of those things. Like he literally put out postcards saying that the union leadership had blood on their hands. And what he's talking about is 110 deaths of transit workers during COVID, largely due to a lack of the most basic PPE, and how they were the union basically functioned as a propaganda arm of the MTA bosses and allowed the conditions that led directly to mass death. So Canella is elected as an opposition leader. And Steve, I'm sure you've seen this many times. They all go in fire breathing with their hands raised. They're not going to accept any disrespect. They're not going to take it. This kind of machismo of they alone are not going to allow their members to be disrespected. And, that members buy into that because they want to hear somebody who's at least angry about their conditions. Like they really want to hear somebody who is fed up with the disrespect that we face on an everyday basis from MTA management and from the ruling class in general. So Canella is elected by a 2-to-1 margin, massively, because the previous VP, Eric Logel, was basically going out into the field and telling members they don't need masks, and that if they're a healthy person, they don't need a mask, and they'd be selfish to ask for them because doctors and nurses really needed them. And those people he was talking to, many of them got COVID, and we got tens of thousands of sick illnesses, some very severe long COVID, et cetera. So Eric gets thrown out on a wave of getting revenge on leadership that doesn't care about our lives. So now Gomez gets elected, and basically almost the minute he's elected, he starts fostering cozy relationships with Tony Utano, who was the leader of the union at the time, and is connected to the John Samuelson bureaucracy that leads the International Union. So Gomez slowly but surely morphs into exactly what he said he was running against. And the change was almost automatic. And he's gone along with management at every turn and has basically pushed the line that he can't do anything to fight management because the members won't do anything, because the members won't shut down work on their own. They won't organize to refuse to do unsafe work on their own. And of course, as you know, if we really believe that workers could do it on their own, they wouldn't need unions at all. There would be no reason for a union. The whole union's point is to organize our struggle against the bosses. And it's our numbers and that organization that gives us strength. So on February, this devolves over a long period of time where he gets into very contentious relationships with oppositionists who supported him over a long period of time and who he worked with over a long period of time to fight against the very regime that he said he wanted to get elected to change. There's an intense back and forth between himself and Tramell Thompson, the head of Progressive Action Caucus within the union, who has a long history, and we have many disagreements, but Canella was part of their slate when he was running for office and then got elected. And they got into very personal back and forth. There's heated language back and forth. And then Canella meets Tramell where he knows he's working in a crew room with another union representative who's appointed by Canella to do union work, was never elected, and they basically provoke an incident. That's what I think based on what I've heard, and that's what members think based on what they've heard. And the incident results in Tramell Thompson being hospitalized, his orbital bone being fractured, two broken bones in his leg, and both of them are arrested and taken off of TA property in handcuffs, which is all kinds of bad for the union movement. And so then the question becomes not who's right and who's wrong in this particular instance, but what to do about the disgrace that this has brought upon the union movement, because it taps into all of the racist anti-worker narratives that the bosses love to spread about unions, that we're all thugs and gangsters and we want to physically impose ourselves upon people and we're coercive and we want to threaten people. It taps into all of that narrative. And Canella allowed that to happen because he can't separate himself from his emotions enough to understand that he represents 7,500 other workers and that everything he does reflects on all of those members. So I'm sure you have questions about this. So I just wanted to give some of the background and give you an idea of what happened.
Well, the fact that there's a physical confrontation between an officer of a union and a worker on the job raises a real question. What was he doing there at that location? Did he have was there a labor issue that he was on that location?
No, Canella was released to do union work as he should be as the vice president of the department, but he can do union work anywhere. He chose to be at that location where he knew Tramell Thompson was working at.
So there was no union issue at that location?
Well, I mean, the union has issues everywhere. In other words, he was out in the field. He was out in the field, supposedly speaking to members, putting up literature. And what Canella wants us to believe is that he was doing nothing. He didn't provoke anything. He was just putting up flyers in the crew room. And Tramell Thompson came up and sucker punched him and started this whole thing. But yet, Tramell has all of the injuries. And, it's just the idea that you can walk out of that room. Just like you walked in, you can walk out of that room. The idea that you can't walk out of the room means that you're a macho asshole, not a trade unionist. It means that you can't put your own personal feelings aside. Well, the bosses are going to get in your personal feelings all the time. Got news for you. They're going to try to provoke you every time. And you're going to let them? And that's the problem, is that, union is supposed to represent all of us. It represents our class. And for him to publicly do so at this person's workplace where he has no other choice but to be there is abusive. And
I understand also he's bragging about it. Is that true?
Yeah, he put out Rocky pictures with members standing with their dukes up in a sweatsuit and a hat themed on Rocky. So clearly...
He put that out?
He put that out, yeah. Canella.
Canella Gomez. He put out pictures of him like making a joke of it as a fighter?
Yeah, showing a Rocky pose and a fighter's pose with other members with smiles on their faces. And then on top of that, he handed out bats with the logo of his slate, the new RTO emblazoned on them, little wooden bats. So like everything he's done.
So that sounds like malicious.
Yeah. Everything he's done since has been bragging about it. In fact, he went to work the next day and bragged about it at the executive board meeting. And we have numerous reports of that. So, I mean, Steve, I hate to tell you that, we want to be proud of our unions. We want to believe in the organizations of our class. But I've been a member of the executive board of Local 100. And it's vomitous. It really is a disgrace on the name of the working class. They are like a frat. They're like a gang. That's how they think.
And what's the role of this lawyer, Arthur Schwartz?
Well, Arthur Schwartz is the union's lawyer.
I understand he's also a member of the union?
No, he's been on union staff. I don't think he's been a member of the union. But he's been on union staff for like 30 years. And he's also runs for office in the Democratic Party. So he's ingratiated himself in many quarters. And, the worst part of all this, the union president comes out and makes a statement saying that his VP was sucker punched. Now, I wasn't there. He wasn't there. Many people weren't there. But as the union president, for you to take sides against your own members in a fight between two members is just the most gross betrayal of...
So there was no hearing
No.
There's no really examination of what happened. And the union president has said that defended that officer without any kind of hearing.
The next day he defended him in the newspaper. It was in the Daily News. It was in a major, ruling class newspaper. I mean, we don't talk about anything with the ruling class newspapers unless, you're putting out the line of the union. So this is the line of the union that, that members can be assaulted if they come out of their face to their union.
So are you saying that this officer with the backing of the president of the union engaged in an assault on a rank and file union member? He's defending it publicly.
Yeah.
And the officer who did this is bragging about it. And the local 100 leadership is supporting this kind of, I would say, gangsterism.
Yeah, they're basically saying that he was attacked, is what they're saying. And then they said they're going to do an investigation. And of course, management is going to do an investigation. But we are raising motions in the train operatives division, which is Canella Gomez's division, calling for his removal from office. And they've passed overwhelmingly. And so they're going to be on the agenda of next month's meeting. But we're also putting pressure on the executive board members because the executive board is supposed to be independent. It's supposed to be a check on any officer. And they all take an oath of office saying that if they see any abusive behavior by a fellow officer, they're supposed to bring them up on charges.
Well, it sounds like the entire leadership of the local should resign if they allow this kind of thing to go on. I mean, a gangster attack on a union member and then bragging about it afterwards, and they go along with that. Has any executive board member said enough is enough? No, we have to have a hearing. We have to really find out who's accountable for this.
Yeah, I've heard nothing about an executive board member even making a motion or even talking about it at the executive board. But I'm not on the executive board, so I can't vouch for what goes on at those meetings at this point. But, the other thing is that the bylaws are so rotten and so anti-democratic that the members who elected Canella Gomez cannot remove him. We cannot remove him. We can't have a recall vote on this VP. Only the executive board can take that action. An executive board of 55 people trumps the votes of 7,000 RTO department members.
So there was a protest by rank and file members. What happened at that protest?
Well, I wasn't present at the protest because unfortunately I was working that day, but I know that it was dozens of members showed up and there were speeches and a lot of those are available online. But it was basically the only thing that happened. The only response from the union was their public relations department chief came out to take pictures. And then shortly thereafter, some of those pictures wind up on a hack blog called Union Truth Squad, which is basically a prop of the union leadership. They put up memes and they mock people who are oppositionists and try to set them up for, in some cases, further charges and stuff like that. Saying someone has dual employment, those kind of things.
So it's kind of a bully board or a smear board.
Yeah, it's the kind of thing the right wing does.
And who runs that?
No one will take credit for it, but if I had to guess, it's the former VP Eric Logel. But we couldn't prove that because he's hiding like the coward that he is behind a troll Facebook account.
And this whole issue of transit workers, and we just covered the struggle of Chicago transit workers, where they face part-time work, they face harassment, bullying on the job, physical assaults. Eric Slater, who was on the executive board and running for president, was arrested while he was campaigning. The union leadership, apparently that ATU local, conspired with the management to have him arrested. So he wouldn't be able to campaign. And this was approved by Acosta, the international president, in which management was intervening in the election. It was approved by the international president of the ATU. It sounds like there's a systemic problem of corruption and basically, the management of the union is operating, colluding with the management of these agencies. Is that true?
Well, that's absolutely true. But, I know Eric's case, this is not the first time he's had the police called and been threatened with arrest or arrested. So they have a long-standing, this is their go-to move, management. And for the union to collaborate with that is just atrocious. But, I think that we have to think about, in a public agency where your boss is the governor or the mayor, that kind of incestuous relationship where they name the people to the MTA board. There's all sorts of corruption going on in the MTA with no bid contracts, kickbacks to campaign contributors, $81 million elevators. it's like 10 times more than it costs anywhere else in the world, like for one elevator, and they're all no bid contracts. So, but then the other thing,
how could they be no bid contracts?
Well, because a lot of that gets pushed through a board that's stacked with governor appointed members and mayoral appointed members, and they're all like either former fundraisers for these people, or they donate money. They go in and out of the private sector back into the public sector. So there's a whole nest of corruption there just because it's a public entity. But the union leadership is a nest of corruption. I mean, they just ran an election where something like 8,000 transit workers in New York City were allowed to vote, 8,600, I believe it was, in a union of 1.42 thousand workers. And they basically used COVID. They used people being sick because of COVID as an excuse to invalidate their ability to vote in the election. Because they didn't, let me remember, I have COVID. I may be dying, but let me remember I got to pay my $30 biweekly union payment. Otherwise, I won't have any say in my union's future. So they function very much like the bosses. They want to be the bosses. They get dressed up in their suits and they rub shoulders with the bosses. In reality, they think they're partners with the ruling class. And this has to end. It all has to end.
And Evangeline Byars was running for president. What happened to her?
Well, she was not allowed to run because of her own issues with it was sometime when she was off the payroll and she didn't pay her dues, I guess, as timely as they wanted her to. But yeah, they clearly suppressed her ability to run. They said all sorts of sexist shit about her. They engaged in, you can't just be in opposition. You can't just be in opposition to somebody. You have to question their mental capacities. You have to engage in all sorts of slanderous stuff. I mean, me and Evangeline have our differences, but what they did to her was grossly anti-democratic and wrong.
And the issues facing transit workers, public workers for that matter, in New York, you have a Democratic governor, you have a mayor, a Democratic mayor who basically wants to attack the workers, take away their health care benefits, or privatize their health care benefits. It seems like there's an onslaught, and a lot of the contracts are coming up. There's privatization. Just recently they're approving more charter schools in New York.
Yeah, well, they're trying to anyway.
It seems like there's an onslaught, and yet the power of the workers in New York, the transit workers and the other teachers, public service workers, they're not being brought together, it seems.
Yeah, I mean, I think they're taking advantage of the fact that the working class is demoralized given the leadership that we have, and they don't really see any path forward. And they see leaders who obstruct their path forward at every single step along the way and use every resource at their disposal to try to silence them. So, yeah, the Democratic Party has been very successful, but also, I mean, the Democratic Party is responsible for the fact that New York City Transit got nearly $30 billion in bailouts from the federal government, and transit workers haven't received not a dime in hazard pay.
What happened to that money? You're saying they got $30 billion and transit workers haven't received a dime from that?
In multiple tranches of stimulus, they got nearly $30 billion in funding, and nobody knows where the money went, except that it probably went to their capital program as kickbacks to their buddies. But if you were a union that cared at all about getting hazard pay, like the union has hazard pay on the list of demands, they have significant wage increases on their demands. But what does that really mean? If you're not willing to find out where the money went to, how can you possibly hope to ever be able to force the MTA to give you any of that money in terms of hazard pay? And what kind of union goes into a wage negotiation without a number? They're the only union I've ever heard of that goes into a wage negotiation without a number. And basically that sets us up to below inflation wage increases, no cost of living adjustments, bullshit hazard pay if we get it, and God knows how many concessions to pay for it.
And you're facing a contract fight. Have there been any rallies? Has the union mobilized to prepare for the contract, to educate the membership and the public about the needs of transit workers?
Well, they haven't announced any plans for a rally at all, which is really kind of historic. I mean, even after COVID, there are protests. There've been protests all the time about the budget. There's been protests in the city for a long time over many of these issues. But there are no plans at all for any kind of protest of transit workers, and likely the contract will be settled before anything that happens. But even
it sounds like they're spending their time beating up members and not organizing against the bosses.
yeah, pretty much. I mean, if they, like if they were so brolic, why don't they kick the boss's ass? But they keep getting knocked out all over the mat, and there they are trying to flex on members. And my union vice president, he thinks it's a smart idea to mock members and say, "Oh, I tell you not to operate unsafe equipment, and you operate unsafe equipment. I tell you to refuse to do unsafe work, and you do it anyway. I tell you not to operate with shopping carts on your trains because one of our members died in a fire because of that, and you do it anyway." Well, what do you think members do it anyway? They don't see any organization of leadership.
Is there a health and safety rank and file health and safety committee to enforce the health and safety regulations?
No, there's a health and safety department that's appointed by the president of Local 100 and the executive board. It has no
and what is it? What does it do?
It's supposed to do safety shutdowns. It's supposed to do spot inspection.
Has it done any of that?
I mean, they do monthly walkthroughs, but I haven't seen anything change at all.
So they actually haven't shut down operations because they are unsafe.
They do it on a spot basis, like for a photo op. Like they'll go to a place one day and do a spot safety check where they'll take trains out of service. But it's all to do a selfie to show they're doing something, and so that members will believe in them.
I mean, kind of a PR stunt.
Yeah, but and I know you have to teach members to know their own power. You can't just talk at them. You can't just do a one-off kind of thing. They have to actually know how to do it themselves. And even worse, the union put out a video recently, which is nothing but victim porn. They actually show the pictures of assaulted transit workers on a video that says that that the MTA abandoned us and the MTA showed gross negligence during the pandemic, and they aren't doing anything to actually protect us. Look, we want to draw attention to the fact that the conditions that transit workers face, but I am never putting the picture of somebody who was assaulted on property doing their job on a union video to say, "Oh, feel sorry for us." That's victim porn, and that's abusive.
And the corruption that you're talking about is endemic, and the Democratic Party is part of that. Is there any movement to talk about a workers' party, a labor party, for the unions to have their own political party?
Well, I mean, I don't think there's going to be any labor party until the trade union movement actually starts kicking some ass on a much larger level. Like you see sporadic kinds of bursts of struggle. Normally it's rank and file led, or normally it's by socialists within the trade union movement leading struggles that other leaderships weren't willing to lead. But on a national level, people would actually have to believe in the trade and the bureaucracy.
But wouldn't you fight for that in the union and say one of the reasons for the corruption, one of the reasons they're not doing anything is it means fighting the Democrats who they're politically supporting and giving union dues to? I mean, in other words, the whole public workforce in this country is supporting, for the most part, Democrats. And the Democrats are involved in privatization. The Democrats are involved in corruption, like the Republicans.
Well, I mean, look, we would want to fight for a labor party. We would want to fight in the direction that you're talking about. When I'm giving the background of what it takes to get from where we are to where we have to go.
But I would think that, I mean, politically, I mean, when people say, what can you do? Because it's a rigged deal. In other words, you have a union that doesn't want to get out of the way. They're taking your money.
Yeah,
and basically they're colluding with the Democrats, and they're making sweetheart deals. And so, it sounds like not only a labor struggle, but a political struggle against the relationship of your unions, and all the unions for that matter, with the Democratic Party.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. But I think that it's not just the rotten relationship with the Democratic Party that has to be uprooted. It's the entire bureaucracy that has to be uprooted before you're going to get workers to believe that a labor party can happen, or they're gonna see their own power. In other words, workers, although they have tremendous power, are atomized and isolated at work and have the boss's ideas in their head. And right now, the trade union movement functions as a transmission belt of boss ideology into our consciousness. And unless they see victories and real victories that they had a role in, I don't see a labor party as being something.
Well, I mean, I think that raising the issue doesn't mean it's going to happen automatically. However, the fact that the corruption, privatization, outsourcing is being done by the Democratic Party with the collusion of the union leadership is an important political aspect of your whole struggle. I mean, it's the same in San Francisco, the same in Chicago. I mean, the Democratic Party is colluding with the union leadership to implement their agenda. I mean, your union supported the governor of New York.
Right.
And what has she done since she's been elected?
Well, nothing, but she was running against the fascists. So, there is, you know what I mean, Steve? We're in a real fucked up political environment right now. Okay. It's fascist.
Well, are you going to be supporting Biden and Kamala Harris? I mean, that's the choice the American working class is being presented with. Biden or Trump in 2024.
The stakes are real fucking high. The stakes are real fucking high. We're not being given choices we want. We're being given choices that are left for us to make because the working class is not organized in the kind of numbers that it needs to be to have a political voice to change the balance of forces.
Well, I would say that the working class is in unions. They have power, but there's an albatross sitting on the working class that doesn't want a mobilization, doesn't want all public workers together. In fact, in your union, it apparently doesn't even want to rally to get a good contract.
Right. But the question is that the bureaucracy is the key is the linchpin to the immobilization and the passivity of the working class. They are literally acting as the getaway drivers for management in so many different ways. So the Democrats politically are toxic and are anti-working class. But if you want to weaken the Democratic Party's hold on the working class, we have to uproot the bureaucracy of labor, who actually stands in the way of us actually having a one-on-one fight with our own bosses. Because I was on the executive board, they brought Eric Adams to the executive board and said he's one of us. And the vote was over. It was rigged from the beginning. There was no way he was not.
So your local voted for Eric Adams?
Yes, they did. Yeah, absolutely. And they still support him to this day.
And what is Eric Adams proposing for the working class in New York?
He's proposing retirees to have to pay out of pocket higher co-pays for health insurance. He's basically attacking people on fixed income. Plus, we don't believe the cops are a union, but even the supposed union that everybody points to, they're getting 3%. And they went without a contract since 2017. And then DC 37, one of the largest municipal workers, they're getting about the same, a little less than that, actually.
So you're talking about wage cuts for workers.
Pretty effective wage cuts, yeah. But Steve, this is not new. We've had effective wage cuts for the past 2 or 3 decades. We haven't had a real contract raise above inflation the entire time I've been in the union, and many years before that. I've been in the union 17 years. In July, we have not had one wage increase above inflation, not one. We get 2%, 2.75%, 2.5%. Three is like the highest we ever.
So you're losing.
Yeah, we're losing. In the last contract, the last year alone, inflation was 11%. This year, it's like 5 or 6%. So my last wage increase was in May of last year was 2.75%. So what kind of wage cut is that for me?
So what do members feel about that? What do members feel?
They're furious. They're furious about it, and they're the only hope of actually dragging this leadership into fighting for anything that could represent a real cost of living in this whole contract battle. But likely, if I had to guess what we're going to come back with, if we get 4%, I think that would be a lot from this leadership.
Well, if there's no education of the membership, the mobilization or education or political campaign by this leadership, then the likelihood of getting anything is up in the air. Now,
it definitely is. But members still have to vote no on a sellout contract. Members still have to organize rank and file vote no committees and begin to take steps to rip control of this runaway train from these morons who are going to get our union destroyed in the process of all this. Because you know where this leads. You got fascists get elected, or not just elected. If they take power, unions are going to be a thing of the past. You're going to be talking about them like the dinosaurs. And that's a very real possibility. And so the working class has to understand that we are the safeguard of unions continuing to exist in this country.
And there was the Vermont AFL-CIO passed a resolution before 2016, saying that if there's an attempted coup or insurrection, there should be a general strike. Richard Trumka ruled that they couldn't talk about it. He would put them in trusteeship, and later they said, well, we were talking about it, but we didn't want to talk about a general strike because that would have given a pretext for Trump to impose martial law.
Oh boy,
that's what they said. But there is a danger of fascism in this country. There's Absolutely. A danger of a coup, and yet the union leadership don't want to talk about it. It seems that their main solution is Biden and the Democratic Party will save us. Do you believe that?
Well, I don't believe that Biden and the Democratic Party will save us. I want to be clear about that. I'm a socialist. I think they're, ruling class shits. But, sometimes you want the ruling class shit that's not going to end democracy immediately to get power, rather than the one who tells you, yes, that's exactly.
Well, it sounds like, they're the way that they're going to war and militarizing this country, militarizing the world. Mm-hmm. Is threatening a world war, and the union, again, the AFL-CIO, the union leadership are going along with the war machine. It's nearly $1 trillion, the U.S. military budget.
Well, they always wrap themselves in the flag, and they're always in support of the ruling class in one way or another, because they actually see them. They want class peace. They just want to be consulted. They want their take. They want their place at the bargaining table to negotiate our surrender. But as far as a general strike and as far as the kinds of struggles that we need to actually fight fascism, you're beginning to see in France and other places the kinds of militant, struggles that actually threaten the established order and actually point in the direction of what the world could be like if workers ran the world and actually decided what was produced and how it was produced. And, so in England, you see a lot of transit strikes, healthcare strikes. There's a large wave of these struggles coming. And as much as the bureaucracy seems ever present, they're going to be like the Dutch boy with their finger in the dike when the waves do come for the kinds of struggles that are inevitable. It's not because I say they're inevitable. It's because the class struggle makes them inevitable, because the boss's interests are irreconcilable with our interests. And when you talk about raising the Social Security retirement age, the kinds of things that these assholes are talking about, they're going to sit on top of a volcano, because it's just bound to happen, those kinds of struggles. But we definitely need organization, a political organization that actually makes sense of the world and actually poses real solutions. And that's what's sorely missing.
And on May Day, I understand there are going to be demonstrations in New York City. Yeah. Is TWU 100 involved at all in organizing for May Day?
Almost every other year we were, but all of our local 105 coalition members are actually working on Labor Day, which is on May Day, which is actually kind of shows where we're at. We are giving solidarity to Philippine trade unionists and others who are engaging in actions. I know there's an action by workers at Union Square on May Day, and we're trying to encourage as many workers who can attend them. But yeah, it's sad that the days we celebrate are not the days that really matter, right?
You have the Taylor Law,
yeah,
which makes it illegal to go on strike. It fines workers if they do go on strike. You have the Railway Labor Act,
yeah,
which is used against railway workers. And the Democrats, Biden and the liberal Democrats, Democrats who call themselves socialists, voted for a bill that required workers to go back to work without sick days.
Yeah,
there is no national campaign to remove these laws, even though they threaten the rights of labor to use their power, labor power, as workers in other countries are using their power in France and England. Do you see a reason why there's no campaign to repeal the Railway Labor Act or the Taylor Act?
Well, the progressives, the so-called progressives or social democrats in Congress are not very impressive at all, and they don't actually. Basically, they've spent a lot of time collaborating with Pelosi and Schumer and all these people, and they believe that you're supposed to maintain friendly relationships with the people who you supposedly got elected to replace and to push out of power and to go in a different direction. But in terms of these laws, like right now, the union is engaging in this bullshit of putting forward a bill proposed by Jessica Ramos, who's supposedly a lefty, supposedly, DSA, Social Democrat, and all of that. And the bill is basically modeled on the Federal Railway Labor Act, which basically makes it so that you have to go through 1,000 years of mediation and arbitration, and maybe on a rainy day in April, if it's a Friday, and if it's not too cold, maybe you can strike.
This is the reform bill. This is the
reform bill. Yeah, it's like mediation on top of mediation on top of mediation, and maybe someday we can strike. And they're posing this to try to say that they're fighting for transit workers' right to strike, which is a complete crock of shit. This is a leadership under Samuelson who basically said they would never strike. They basically banned the word from ever being used, but somehow they're fighting for our right to strike. So it's all smoke and mirrors. It's all posturing to make it seem like they're fighting for things that we need when they're really not serious about fighting for any of it. It's like the demand for hazard pay. I can say all I want in my contract, I want hazard pay, but if you let your employer get $30 billion from the federal government and you didn't get a dime of it, what is a demand on a contract demand? It's just a show. It's a fraud.
And so what is being done around both? You're taking up a campaign to remove this official who assaulted a worker. I mean, are there going to be continuing demonstrations? And
it looks like there's going to be charges at the executive board, but I'm not sure when those will be heard. Given the composition of the executive board, I don't have high hopes that they would pass a vote to remove him. But I think that members need to keep the pressure up. I mean, I think the only guarantor of any kind of justice for working class people or any kind of sense of their own power is to keep their boots in the necks of their current leadership and force them to do things they don't want to do. Because we're never going to force the bosses to do things they don't want to do, unless we can force our union leadership to fight when they have no interest in fighting, to have some kind of respect for the union that they supposedly lead. So I mean, it's going to be a long struggle. It's not going to be an easy struggle, but the fight continues. And ultimately, what's missing from this is workers seeing their role in it. We need many more workers to step forward and be part of that.
And your group that you organize, how can people get in touch with it or find out more about your organization?
Yeah, you can look up Local 100 Fight Back Coalition on Facebook. You can also find it on my Facebook page, and I'll give the link so maybe you can put it in the comments or later. But we do live streams on a regular basis, not just about union issues, but also about political issues, because we think that part of what's missing is workers' voices being heard on political issues, and it's important to give an opportunity for not just ourselves, but for other workers to have their voices heard, and to begin to tackle questions that there are no easy answers for. Everybody can tell you the revolution's around the corner tomorrow. Everybody may have a line of motion or a line of march that they think the struggle has to go through, and maybe they can sketch that out for you. But they can't. But there is no struggle that's going to take place without the working class actively engaging in those debates and being part of deciding what the future needs to look like. So we try in a small way to give a view and an opportunity for workers to have that kind of discussion.
And the use of the internet, Zoom, workers, the teachers used it, social media to organize. Mm-hmm. And it seems to be internationally can be used as well to link up workers around the world who are fighting the same fight, same conditions.
Yeah, I wouldn't be in contact with half the workers I know around the world if it wasn't for Zoom, if it wasn't for many other social media platforms. It's a great organizing tool. But at the same time, it's not a substitute for the everyday one-on-one discussions, the working together on the job.
Well, what's happening in other TWU locals? Because one of the things it seems is that there's similar struggles in not just TWU, but ATU locals around the country. But it doesn't seem that workers are linked up who are fighting the same fight nationally. And there are no national campaigns by all transit workers, not just the ATU, TWU, but together to take on the infrastructure fight and the fight to protect workers, transit workers, and protect the transit systems.
Yeah, but the other thing though is that transit workers are not going to be heard so long as that bureaucracy is drowning them out. As long as when people think of, well, what do the transit workers say? They go and speak to TWU or they go and speak to the ATU. These misrepresentatives of our class, these labor traitors, are a very real stumbling block to getting those working class voices heard. And let's be honest, I mean, we have to start thinking about building new unions. We have to start thinking about what does it look like to have rank and file led from the ground up unionism, and can that happen under a corrupt, bankrupt, in bed with the boss framework that we currently deal with? I mean, it's not something that I would want.
Well, I mean, the fact of the matter is there have been gangster unions that have been overthrown. Workers can't get rid of their leadership. I have a history of that. So, it is possible for rank and file to take control of their locals.
It definitely is. But with the level of vote rigging that we're facing and the level of state intervention to help them suppress members' rights to vote, that opens a whole nother.
That's what the case in Chicago is. You have the state arrest a candidate for president, intervening in the election, and the union goes along with it, and the state is trying to go after the member. Yeah. So, and in New Orleans, Valerie Jefferson was an officer fired by the management, and the company helped intervened in the election to get a pro-corporate guy in office, and the union went along with it. So if the union is colluding with management against rank and file, and even against local leaders who are fighting for the membership, that presents a real problem. In San Francisco TWU, Roger Marenko was removed twice. So it seems like it's a national issue in many other locals other than throughout the country.
Yeah, when your union leadership will call in the Department of Labor of New York State to intervene and lecture you on why they're right and you're wrong. And they did that to Evangeline Byars, by the way, during this whole thing. And I had a front row seat to all of that.
What happened with that? How did that happen?
They had like a Zoom meeting where basically they had one day when everybody who was a candidate got to come and ask questions of the Department of Labor about the way in which Local 100 was running their elections, and how they were suspending many members' right to vote over issues that they had no control over because they were sick. And they were basically, the entire meeting was like a screaming match back and forth where they wouldn't even let oppositionists talk, and they proceeded to lecture them about, oh, you just don't understand. You don't know how this works. You don't understand how the labor law works. And you say, let me explain to you, that kind of thing. And that's the Democratic.
Was that organized by Arthur Schwartz?
Yeah, it was organized by Arthur Schwartz and who the other guy was.
So Arthur Schwartz got his Democratic Party buddies to come in and lecture members.
Yes.
Is that what happened?
Exactly. And go silent when it comes to investigating anything after the election.
Yeah, where is Arthur Schwartz with the member who assaulted an officer who assaulted a rank and file member on the job?
Oh, well, where is the leadership that doesn't understand their obligation to represent all members? What a disgrace to the very idea of unionism, that you weren't there, but you're going to throw your own member under the bus. Boy, everybody wants to found a union like that. They're just chomping at the bit to join a union like that scabs on its own members. It's unbelievable. But, I mean, just because it's dark right now doesn't mean things aren't going to change. We both know that what makes a union strong is our power, is our class power, and organizing that power. And that always is the key determinant on changing these very dark conditions that we face both on the job and in our unions. But, if we're going to have any self-respect, we have to refuse to accept any kind of union leadership like this. And there has been too little of that because people think it's not possible to overcome the entrenched institutional advantage they have. Well, we have to start thinking about what are the ways forward and how do we get the working class up off the bench? Because just like my union, I'm going to get my ass kicked if I'm doing it all alone. If I'm leading the fight alone, if me and you are the guys who are on the barricades and the rest of the workers aren't there with us, we're going to get our ass kicked. And we have to understand, we have to find methods of drawing workers to see themselves in the picture, and they just don't right now. And that's what has to change.
Okay, well, I want to thank you for joining us on Work Week. We've been talking with John Ferretti, and he's a activist and with Local 100 Fight Back Coalition, and he's a longtime transit worker fighting for democracy and membership control. So thanks for joining us on Work Week.
Thank you so much for your time.